Today, I want to talk to you about something that inevitably comes up every single time that I am working with artists, and that is this fear of being seen. And I think this is a really important discussion because if you have not experienced the fear of being seen, then you're probably not taking enough risks in your business or in your life. So let's dive deeper and talk about how do you move past this fear. And I'm going to share some personal experiences with all of you. And let's go ahead and dive deeper. So I think for every artist that I talk to about this idea of storytelling and how important it is in order to actually sell your art. And yeah, like anytime I bring this up with a group of artists, this fear seems to be one of the hottest topics, right? And so if you experience this fear of being seen, I want you to know, first of all, that you are absolutely not alone in that. And so we're going to talk a little bit deeper about how to address this fear. And really, I think oftentimes as artists or creatives, especially in the day and age of social media and having to show up and put ourselves out there, talk about our story, I think that, we oftentimes, get this like uncomfortable feeling, right? And we automatically think that fear is bad and that, we tend to play into that fear, right? But I just want to encourage you that even the artists who have, quote unquote, made it, they probably still experience some level of fear. And so automatically, I just want to encourage you that fear is not necessarily bad. It's what you choose to do with that fear. And honestly, in my own business, I have found that, when I'm experiencing a certain level of fear, it usually, especially the fear of being seen, it usually means that I am taking bigger risks in putting myself out there. And oftentimes I find that I have to identify where the fear is coming from and address it in my emotions, in my thoughts, and honestly, almost push past that fear. And there's a phrase that says, do it anyway. And so that is one of the things that I think you have to recognize when you are addressing this fear of being seen. So I want to take a minute and talk about why I believe that storytelling is the most important thing for being able to sell your art. Okay, and we're going to talk at towards the end of this video about why this is so incredibly important if you're wanting to sell your art. And so first of all, I just want to say that, I think that artists oftentimes they try to separate themselves from their art, right? And they think that it's enough to just post photos of their art on social media without offering any kind of story related to their art and the art that they've been making. And oftentimes I find, especially with artists, is this fear of being like being exposed, or even just a fear of vulnerability, especially when it comes to sharing their art. And look, I get it, because, you know, our art is an extension of ourselves. But if there is no reason for a collector or a customer to make an emotional connection to who you are as an artist and to the message and meaning behind your art, then most likely they are not going to buy any of your work. So, how do we actually put ourselves out there in a way that feels safe and in a way that allows for our audience and our collectors to make an emotional connection to our art, right? And so let's dive a little bit deeper, because I think that the more that you focus on really your identity as an artist and feeling confident in who you are and what you have to bring to the table, I think the easier this gets, and the more that you won't struggle with this fear of being seen. Okay, so let's start with the number one way that I encourage artists to really look at this fear of being seen. The first thing, okay? And I think this one is important to have an understanding of where this is coming from, especially when it comes to sharing our art online and showing up in an authentic way, right? And so I think it's important to really ask yourself, where is this fear actually coming from? Why do we have this fear? And are we actually willing to let it go? And oftentimes I think that, especially as artists, we are such incredibly sensitive people. And it's so easy for us to pick up these thoughts that maybe are not our own, like maybe even going back as far as childhood, right? And we carry around these thoughts and these beliefs about ourselves and our creativity that may or may not be true, right? And so looking at your life and looking at some of these fears of being seen, I want you to really start to pinpoint where these thoughts and this fear is actually coming from. Maybe it was a highly critical parent who constantly berated your creativity or the way that in which you did something, right? Maybe it was a spouse or a friend who actually, made us feel less than or didn't value what we had to offer, right? Especially when it comes to telling a story, right? And maybe this one I think is the worst. Maybe it's actually our own inner critic, and maybe it's the fact that we are being highly judgmental towards ourselves. And I find that oftentimes for me, I am my own worst critic, right? Especially when it comes to opening up and showing up in a very authentic way, especially on camera, in front of, a whole bunch of people, right? And so I can be so much more critical of myself, and I can pick apart a video that I made or the way that I look, and I think that oftentimes, even if originally maybe it was a parent who was highly critical of us, we often internalize those voices and we become our own worst enemy when it comes to showing up in an authentic way online and behind the camera. So I think once you can sort of pinpoint some of those different areas where this fear of being seen actually began, I think it's important to actually stop and identify what are some of the lies that we are believing as a person when it comes to showing up. And I think that when you actually look at what some of those fears are and what some of those lies that are attached to the beliefs that you believe about yourself, right? And when, honestly, I think that even just speaking those thoughts out loud to a group of people, it often just like dispels the power of it, right? And so here's a few examples of some of these beliefs / lies that we may be telling ourselves when we have this fear of being seen. And I think you could even finish this sentence here. If I share more of my story, I am afraid that ... Okay, finish that sentence and don't think too deeply about it. Just whatever comes to your mind, then blurt it out or tell someone else. Even just writing it out in your journal, even recognizing what those thoughts are, what that lie is that you're believing about yourself, or what it means to open up online or, even in person with someone else. So it could be, I am afraid people will laugh at me. I am afraid I will look dumb. I am afraid no one will understand me or my journey. Or I'm even afraid that no one will notice me. I'm afraid that I will just be ignored, that what I have to share is not valid, that it's not true, right? And so I think even in those situations where we have in the past maybe shared pieces of our heart and it wasn't received in the way that maybe it should have been, then we tend to shut those things down preemptively before we even start sharing with someone else. Okay? And just recognizing, on a day-to-day basis, when those things tend to come up, even just recognizing it will help you move past those fears, those thoughts, those beliefs that you have about who you are as a person. And I just want to encourage you, because for me, honestly, the longer I've been doing this, the easier that it gets. And the more that I really work on some of my thoughts and beliefs about who I am and what I have to offer the world and, artists in general, I think the more that I feel secure in that, the less it matters to me about who or what people think about me, right? Because I have a deeper understanding of who I am and what I have to offer, right? And basically, when you get to that place, it's kind of like if people have the wrong idea about you or if they believe something that maybe isn't true, or maybe even your message just doesn't resonate with someone, the more I'm able to say, well, that person just isn't my person. And that's okay, because I can readjust my focus onto the people who actually need what I have to say. And so this is so incredibly cheesy, but I think it does sort of help in that there is this idea of the acronym of fear. And I think that we have a choice when we experience fear in our lives, right? We can, one, forget everything and run, right? Totally cheesy, I know. Or we can face everything and rise. And so I think that choosing to show up regardless of what that fear is, what those beliefs are that we are rewiring our brain like to not believe anymore, and replacing that with truth and say, no, someone needs to hear my story. Someone needs to hear what I have to offer and what I have to give the world. When you replace those lies and those beliefs with truth and with the fact that what you have to offer is important, then it makes it easier to face everything and rise. Okay. So the choice is really just up to you. So I want to talk about another point, and that is this. Okay, vulnerability, which is actually what we're talking about, right? This fear of being seen comes from this place of not wanting to be vulnerable, right? And maybe it's just because we have always, only had things modeled to us to where we only can show people when we have it all figured out, right? And what I find, especially online, is that people are sick and tired of those people who do have it figured all out. And I am one of those people who I try to put out there that I don't have it all figured out. I'm learning just as you are learning. And so anyways, going back to my point about vulnerability, I just want to say that there actually is a cost to being vulnerable, right? And yet, I think that you have to realize that there's also a cost to not sharing your story with people, right? And one of the costs to not sharing your story is that there won't be as many people who make an emotional connection to your art, right? And not only that, there might be some people who are going to miss out on hearing your story, because story is transformative, it's encouragement, and someone needs to hear what you have to offer, especially through the process of you making your art. Okay, so I want to talk and just briefly mention, because Brené Brown talks a lot about vulnerability, and if you've read any of her books, she talks about really the importance of human connection to each other and the importance of vulnerability from that place, right? I believe that every single artist, no matter who you are, deep down has this cry and this need for connection. I think that's part of the reason why we make art in the first place, right? And why we are even wanting to put our art out there. And so unless you make art in a vacuum and you do it just for yourself and you don't care and you don't want to sell your art, well, this video isn't for you, right? But unless you're that person, we all want to have someone connect deeply to our art. And really, honestly, that's what we want, is that someone will see us, right? And I think oftentimes what is scary is that vulnerability piece, right? And I love Brene Brown. She talks about this thing. It's called a vulnerability hangover, right? And that's just this phenomenon that happens where we make a choice to be vulnerable, to put ourselves out there, and then immediately go, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And so if that's something that you have experienced in your life, I just want you to know that's completely normal. And there's a term for it, and it's called a vulnerability hangover. But I think that, that vulnerability hangover is more common than we realize. And what's even more important than just, feeling like a crazy person when we experience that, it's more about what we choose to do in that place and when those emotions hit. So how exactly do we move through that, right? That is an important question to ask ourselves. And so I actually want to talk a minute about this because I think that oftentimes, we as artists, we tend to internalize a lot of our emotions, but even just recognizing them and recognizing that we are feeling emotional or like we have a vulnerability hangover is half of the battle. And honestly, even just looking at it like, yeah, this is part of putting myself out there, and also just letting yourself feel it. Okay, that's one of the things that I've learned how to do. I remember when I had a viral video here on YouTube, and it felt extremely overwhelming to me. And I almost wanted to shut it down right away because it was scary having, something go viral and knowing that there were all of these eyes on this video. And so just letting myself feel those feelings and go, this is just normal. This is part of putting myself out there and showing up, right? And I will say, though, that one thing that I've noticed is that it gets easier. Every time you make a decision to show up and put yourself out there and be vulnerable, the more you put yourself out there, the easier it actually gets. Okay? And there's this phrase that I love, and it says, consistency breeds familiarity, right? And so the first time you make a video to post on Instagram, right? Or the first time you're talking to the camera, the first time you're making your YouTube video, right? You might stumble over your words and feel like, clueless and kind of like the words are not coming out correctly, right? But the more that you do it, the more consistent you are in, making content online and in talking about your story and the things that you've been through, the easier it gets. And really, I think a lot of the emotion gets taken out of it, right? I have 100% experienced this in my own life, okay? And that sort of brings me to, I think, another sort of deep topic, but I want to share with you a little bit about my own story, right? And my own healing journey. So 21 years ago, it'll be actually 22 years. Well, it's 21 and a half. So it'll be 22 years this next summer. I was in a car accident that rearranged my brain. I dealt with chronic pain. I dealt with, I had a traumatic brain injury from that car accident. I, had a really long, difficult recovery. Not only chronic pain, but I was very deep in a depression and I couldn't seem to pull myself out of it. And during this time, I think maybe like 4 or 5 years into my recovery from my car accident, I found creativity and I found my creative practice, which became part of my healing. But something that I've never shared before, I think, because I talk about this all the time, but something that I've never shared before on, in one of my videos is that part of my healing was actually the fact that I told my story. And I can't remember who I heard this from, but when I was in the middle of recovering and healing from my car accident and from my brain injury, and even just from really crappy things that happened, including a trial from the car accident that was like one of the worst things that I've ever walked through, I heard someone say that we actually heal through the process of telling our story. And I didn't realize that how much it really did help for me to talk about my car accident, talk about things that happened to me. And honestly, I think what ends up happening is we come to terms, we learn how to accept that part of our story where we, really struggled or had to experience some sort of suffering. And what the beautiful thing that happens when we do that is that someone else hears what they need to hear, right? And through the process of telling our story to other people, we help other people heal. And that is the most beautiful part. And not only that, it makes it almost to like what we went through and all of this suffering and trauma, it wasn't for nothing. And I think that was one of the most powerful things that I didn't realize that was going to come out of me telling my story, right? And so I think that even just telling our story in relation to our art making, it feels almost like double vulnerable. But at the same time, when we can open up and be vulnerable about these things that have happened to us, and I am probably speaking to someone who it has gone through a lot of suffering, but it might not even be that. It might just be that we don't like putting ourselves out there, right? And so anyways, the thing is that we are doing this. We are choosing to show up. We're choosing to put our art out into the world because we want to make connections with other people. So this brings me to actually the most important part of this video, and I think one of the most powerful ways that we can deal with this fear of being seen, right? And I think that this is the key to all of it, to unlock the willingness to actually show up and put ourselves out there. And that is actually to find your greater purpose in selling your art and in sharing your art with the world, right? And so when we are able to tap into this is the purpose of why I'm putting my art out there, it allows us to get out of ourselves, right? It's not about you. It's not about me. I choose to show up in an online space because I know that my story matters. I know that what I have to share with the world will actually help someone else move farther in their own journey. So I just want to say, we've all been through difficult life experiences and maybe some things that we would rather not talk about, but there comes a point where we have to recognize that what we have to offer could greatly help someone else. Okay, our art is meant to be a gift to the world or a gift to someone. And it's part of this greater purpose. Who are we to actually keep it to ourselves, right? The world and the people who need to hear your message, they are going to benefit from the gift of your art. And so if you are able to actually recognize that you're being selfish by not choosing to show up and by not putting your art out there because someone else needs to hear your story, your message, and someone else needs what only you can offer the world, right? So I have actually been doing this art thing for a while now, and I am still amazed when I come across people or women who have been following me for a while, and they come to me and they tell me how much my story helped them during a difficult season of their lives. And I've even gotten the blessing to meet some of those people in person, face to face. I've met people who have struggled with brain injuries and said that my art spoke to them and encouraged them to dive deeper into color or to embrace color, and that my art impacted them in such a way that they stopped, surrounding themselves with neutral colors, right? And so you just never know the kind of impact that you're going to have on someone else. And it makes the fear of being seen actually dissolve, right? So what if the story you have to share would help someone else feel seen, right? Stop looking at yourself and the fear of being seen and realize that what you have to offer might help someone else feel like they have been seen, right? And I get that from artists all the time, even just showing up to this YouTube channel and talking about some of the things that might come up. It has helped other artists feel like I'm talking straight to them, right? And So it's worth it to me, to the cost of vulnerability and the cost of maybe I'm going to look stupid, or maybe some people might not understand me. What's worth it to me is that those people who do need it hear what I have to say. So, what if the story you have to share would help someone else feel seen? What if the art you had to offer could help someone else heal? Is it not selfish of you to withhold your light and your story? It all comes down to this one thing. We make art in order to make a connection with other people. And that's why we have to move past this fear of being seen. So let me know in the comments if this resonated with you, or if you have any experience of working through this fear and anything that has actually helped you.